Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, our region's longest-running public affairs program. Lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota are joining us today for a recap of the week's activities at the state capitol. This is your opportunity to call or email your legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, Tony Sertich. Lawmakers returned to the state capitol this week after time off for a holiday break. This week, many budget bills were heard in committees as they are prepared for votes in the full House and Senate. The end of the legislative session is a little more than a month away. Today, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions to the lawmakers who represent you. Call the number on your screen with questions or email them to ask@pbsnorth.org. We have members of both the House and the Senate joining us this afternoon. First, Senator Grant Hauschild is a first-term DFL-er from Hermantown, representing Senate District 3. Welcome, Senator Hauschild. And Representative Spencer Igo is a Republican from R-Wabana Township, representing House District 7A. Welcome, Representative Igo. Great to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
First question to Representative Igo. You know, we talk about majority and minority. I'm going to start a little big picture here. You're a member of the minority. The Senate and the House are, the majority party are DFLers. What's it like to serve in the minority? And I don't mean like thoughts and feelings, but like physically, and what is your responsibility as a minority member in the legislature?
Yeah, so, the minority role, the way I kind of look at it is our job is kind of vet the bills that are moving forward, right? Really review everything, but also at that same time, try and find the ways to tweak and make those things better. Not only with the majority in the Senate and the House, when you have the DFL trifecta, really, things can be moving really quickly. And I think it's been talked about a lot in St. Paul. Things are moving very quickly. So I take it upon myself, along with the rest of the minority caucuses, that let's take a fine-tooth comb, let's go through all this stuff and find ways to make these bills better, while at the same time building the relationships needed with the other side to get real things done for Minnesotans.
And how successful have you been in interjecting some of your thoughts and ideas thus far into the legislative process?
It's been tough. My focus, I serve on the Energy Committee, so one of my big bills right away was House File 7, the energy bill that moved forward for the clean energy mandate. And I was really trying to get some things in there, especially for northern Minnesota. They didn't make it into this time. We're moving towards the omnibus bill, so I'm trying to get those things in. But unfortunately, the rate of things, and sometimes there is partisanship, I won't lie and say there isn't, that has kind of kept me out in some places.
Great, and you've only served in the minority, so that's your only
yes.
lens with which to see this. And similar, Senator Hauschild, this is your first term, only been in the majority. This is your first time around the sun in the legislature. What is it like to serve in the majority, and what do you feel your responsibilities are?
You've got 100 balls in the air at one time, and you've got to deliver for your region. When you're passing things, when you're working on bills, you know that there's a big chance that they're going to become law. And so all the bills that I see, all the legislation, all the committees that I'm on, I'm focused on how will this impact my region and how can we deliver the best results for us.
Great. We'll look forward to hearing from viewers at home with your questions. I'm going to start with one we get every week, and it's a Social Security tax. And I know both of you are in support of an elimination of the Social Security tax. I'm going to take a little different track on it since you're both in agreement here. We do know that 50% of Minnesotans already do not pay the Social Security tax because they're under the income threshold. And half of all savings, if you totally eliminated the tax, would go to people making over $143,000. Now, Governor Walz has put out a proposal to really look at not total elimination, but maybe taking care of that next tranche of folks to eliminate the tax. What are your thoughts on a more graduated approach to this and not a total elimination? Senator Hauschild.
Yeah, like you said, Tony, I'm in favor of the elimination of the tax on Social Security. I'm an author on the bill. It's something that I feel really strongly about. With that said, I know, for instance, during the free meals debate, the Republicans were really arguing, why are we giving these benefits to the really wealthy? And so that really got me thinking, well, if we're thinking about that for our kids, for free meals in our schools, perhaps that's something that we need to think about when it comes to other types of proposals. And so when we look at this, I'm looking at getting the best relief for the most amount of seniors possible. And I think we're going to see major tax relief. I think it's going to impact 80%, if not more, of seniors, if not the full elimination. So I'm excited to really provide this relief for our seniors who are in deep need of relief.
A lot of different priorities, Representative Igo, education funding, nursing home funding, and some of these tax relief or tax credit. Your thoughts on a more graduated approach?
Yeah, I guess I still stand, it should be a complete elimination. And here's kind of the reason on that. We're one of 6 states in the nation that actually even taxes to begin with. We should be getting conforming with that. Minnesota is being known as a state that has high taxes. That's not a good thing. And we also have to look at it from another way. The reason you have Social Security is because you spent your whole life paying into it, okay? So no, it's not fair that you're retired and drawing Social Security, that just because you invested wisely or have another pension, that you're paying taxes on that. I don't think that's good government. And we need to do what we can to keep Minnesota attractive, or people are just going to keep retiring to Arizona and Florida, and we're going to lose our seniors who are pillars of our communities.
Yeah, I would just add, I believe it's 13 states in the nation that don't tax Social Security. And one of the things that I've been really focused on is including pensions for our police, for our firefighters, and for our public employees. I think that's a really critical piece. And when the Republicans have introduced their Social Security elimination proposals, they just stay with the Social Security tax. Some of those public employees, some of those police officers don't qualify for Social Security. So we need to make sure when we're doing this bill that we're doing it right. And if we do a graduated or if we do a full elimination, let's make sure it's on parity for our pensioners.
Well, and I'll just add to that too, because the Republicans actually just 3 weeks ago in the Minnesota House moved that bill with the pensions. We were trying to amend it onto a bill, and all Republicans voted to have pensions included with it as well.
Good. Great. Looking forward to include our viewers with any questions moving forward. I want to move over now to the capital investment or bonding bill. And we'll start with you, Representative Igo. This has moved fairly fast. However, it was a bill that was intended to be passed last legislative session and was not done. Some people have tied these two issues together, the Social Security tax elimination and the capital investment bill. And for our viewers at home, capital investment bill is this borrowing that is done to invest in infrastructure projects all across the state. Do you see there being a connection between these two bills, as been talked about by leadership, especially in the Republican Party? And why connect these two bills in particular?
So I think the connection exists because of how session ended last year. When we were talking bonding at the end of last session, it was tied to that tax and Social Security. So when we came into this new session, we were hoping the agreements would stay the same. And the bonding bill, for the most part, stayed the same. Representatives Murphy and Senator Bach really kind of put the bill together that we voted on. So if we were going to pick up the whole deal, I think that's why we're seeing leadership, predominantly in the Senate, talking about we need to have those things tied together. I think it'd be a good act of faith too. Think about it. most Republicans and Democrats across the state campaigned on eliminating Social Security and getting a bonding bill done. So I think it's only right that we put that faith back in the constituents that elect us and do both at the same time. So I do support that they're kind of tied together, really. And it wouldn't be the first time that you have a tax provision go with the bonding bill. And all you have to do is talk to people that are on the legislature for a long time.
And I couldn't disagree more. This wouldn't be the first time either that all of this falls apart if we try to tie these types of things together. Our communities need this bonding. The House GOP voted for a straight up and down bonding bill, and unfortunately the Senate Republicans are trying to tie it up in these other bills. My fear is if we continue to try to hold hostage our bonding bill for other commitments, that all of it could fall apart at the end. So let's get the bonding bill done, let's get this relief, let's get infrastructure to our communities. When I was a city councilor in Hermantown, we were relying on that funding and it fell apart. So I want to make sure we get this bonding bill and we get a really strong tax bill that provides the most historic tax relief we've ever had in this state. We'll get both done, but let's vote on them alone.
Well, and I'll just couple that. I did vote for the bonding bill because I did move forward because I believe exactly what you said. We need to invest in our communities. Now, could there have been a different way to do it? I think we could have probably done that bonding bill cash. I would think you'd probably agree with that too. That would have been a great way to actually get the money to the communities faster, use the surplus to help our communities. And you're right, we need to move it forward. I agree with that. But at the same time, we also need to deliver what a lot of Minnesotans are asking for. Inflation's through the roof, costs are up. And if that's one quick way we can get money back to the people that need it most, we should be doing that. And we should have led with that.
And for the viewers back home, a capital investment bill, if you borrow, you need a supermajority of votes, and that's what we're talking about here. Is it would definitely take Democrats and Republicans working together. Whereas if you just use the surplus, the one-time money surplus, not the ongoing surplus, it would only take a majority vote. And I know that then there's been talk about, well, then do you put in projects of only people who vote for the bill or not? Thoughts on that, Senator Hauschild?
Absolutely. We should be, if you're going to vote for the bonding bill, then you should have projects. But if you're going to try to stall it or not get the bill across the finish line, then why should we be putting in projects in those districts? This should be a no-brainer. Every legislator should vote for this bill. It had a bunch of money for Greater Minnesota. It had a bunch of money for the Iron Range. Honestly, probably more than our fair share as usual, which is critical. And so it's my opinion that everybody has a right to vote for it. But if you're going to try to block it, then we're going to do a cash bill. We have plenty of surplus to do that, and we're going to give it to the legislators that are serious about this issue and are trying to get the infrastructure projects in their communities.
Representative Igo, your thoughts on making it contingent to vote for the bill to get your projects in the bill?
It's a very dangerous path to go down, especially when you have government controlled by one party if you start cutting up the state, that we're just going to ram things. Because keep in mind, this is the first time that majority parties had almost $20 billion to play with going into a budget year. And to start throwing precedent in the past out of the window and just, all right, if you're not going to, if no Republicans are going to support this, we're going to cut all your projects out and take care of our districts. You are in turn not taking care of half of Minnesota. And again, that's a very dangerous statement to be making. So I would be totally opposed to that. I mean, bonding bills are supposed to be bipartisan, working together, finding ways to get greater Minnesota and metro Minnesota to come together. It's a constitutional duty to take care of state infrastructure. It's one of the key roles of government, key tenets of government. And that's why I think it still needs to be a bipartisan bill.
A couple of key points. So first and foremost, the bonding bill has broad programs that provide infrastructure dollars, sewer, water, those types of things to the entire state. So that's a really key piece. The second thing is, I didn't say that it would be partisan. I said that if a legislator votes for it, then we should be including those projects. I think that would encourage legislators to get this bill across the finish line. It's been almost 4 years since we've had a bonding bill. We need some sort of pressure on our legislators to pass these bills for our local communities. So for all of those Republicans in the House that voted for this bill, or if there are Senate Republicans that want to vote for this bill, then let's get those projects included. But we know for a fact that there are a lot of DNR projects, there are a lot of state agency projects that impact districts all across our state that aren't part of these legislative directed appropriations from the bonding bill. So we're going to make sure that the whole state gets some critical infrastructure funding they need.
And when we talk precedent, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that back when Governor Rudy Perpich, our only Iron Range governor, was governor, he did actually set this up where you had to vote for the bill in order to put your projects in the bill. But that was a long time ago. But there is some precedent out there for that from an Iron Range governor.
We have to get it done. We have to get it done.
We got to get it done, but like I said, in this time where, and I think you heard it on the campaign trail just like I did, people want bipartisanship, and if we see, roadblocks start coming up like that, that's not what Minnesotans want. We have to find ways to work together, and it's not like there's a big ask here in Social Security. Again, there's still Republicans voting for it because they see what you and I see together. But it's all about working together, and I think if we start putting these walls up, it's just going to make that metro versus greater Minnesota divide even bigger, and that's hurting the state.
Yeah, no walls are being put up. We presented the bill from that Tom Bach and Mary Murphy worked on. I had many equal Republican projects as Democratic projects, and they voted it down. So we're presenting the opportunity. It's just a matter of whether they want to vote for it.
Okay. And just for point of reference, the Republicans voted it down in the Senate. Many Republicans voted for it in the House. Great. Well, get those calls and emails into us if you have thoughts and feelings. Senator Hauschild, we're going to start with you here. We've talked about the Social Security tax. There's the child care tax credit. We've talked about potential historic investments in education, funding in nursing homes, and we're talking about a huge surplus. But that surplus gets shrunk very rapidly if you do a bunch of these big historic efforts. How do you think about prioritizing when you can probably pick only one or two of these or some sort of graduated way of funding these priorities? What are your thoughts, and what is a higher priority than others as you think about the budget?
Yeah, that's kind of the ultimate question, and I think it really comes down to what do our communities need to thrive? Going around the Northland, going around the Arrowhead, it was housing, it was childcare, it was trying to recruit employers to our region, it was relief in taxes and Social Security and rebates and property tax valuations skyrocketing. So when I think about my priorities, I'm thinking about how do we make the investments we need to grow and provide the relief that we need so that our families can thrive. That's kind of what I'm doing. So one of the bills that I'm sponsoring and authoring is the child care tax credit. This is something that I face myself with young children. I know families all across our region do. And when employers want to maybe move their business here, they need to know there's housing and that there's child care for their employees.
Some of these bigger chunks, what are your top priorities as you're looking at the overall budget?
So when I look at the budget and we look at the surplus, I want to find the way we can have and create the most generational impacts. Because the last thing we want to see is we put this budget into effect, and 2 years from now, we have a bunch of different communities, groups holding the empty bag, and we don't have money to give anymore. Because there's a very good chance, the state could be looking at a deficit in 2 years, depending on how things kind of flush out over the next 2 years. So, I'll use the education bill as an example. Right now, there's going to be, the bill is written that there's going to be historic funding put into education, which I think is great, right? Funding the next generation of Minnesotans. However, I've been spending time this last month talking to our superintendents, our school board members, our teachers. By the time they're done implementing all the mandates that are in the House bill, school districts are going to see a deficit in this year's education bill. Those are huge concerns I have. So the way that I would see using the surplus is finding ways to create tax breaks for the future, put more money in people's pockets, and find ways to streamline. Education's a great example, because if we could find ways to actually return that local control, the reminder that we have independent school districts, back to them, they would have the money they need to program for what they need to do so they can provide that education. Meanwhile, the state can allow people to thrive with less taxes and less burdensome regulations.
But if we put more of that responsibility back on local school districts, doesn't that then go to property taxes and we have more property poor communities in northeastern Minnesota?
So
or are you talking about something else?
I was not talking about taking away funding.
Okay.
I was talking about the unfunded mandates that are attached to the education bill.
Gotcha.
So, okay, here's your new funding that's really great, and it's a historic amount. But oh, by the way, you have to find a way to pay for this, this, and this. Again, the Department of Education is good in its own ways, but we have independent school districts, we have school boards, we have superintendents, we have communities. Let them figure out how to do that stuff and get the mandates out of there. I thought we learned all about all this in COVID.
For example, what is one of the mandates that is frustrating you?
One of the biggest mandates that I hear from the school districts actually isn't even attached to the education. It's the paid family leave. They're looking at, oh my gosh, if we have to start supplying this to all of our teachers or taking away their ability to negotiate, I mean, these school districts, especially our greater Minnesota ones, would just be crippling. And you mentioned the free lunches for all. Mm-hmm. Again, you're not going to find a single Minnesotan that says that we shouldn't make sure every kid gets a meal every day. But I know that once this 2-year freeze is done, some of the school districts on the range could be losing anywhere from $1 million to $2 million a year in funding because of the way the bill was written. Like, these are things we have to address and get fixed, or we're going to have a systemic problem in the future. And that's why this budget year is so important.
Senator Hauschild, you're on the Education Policy Committee, not Finance Committee. Are you seeing some of these mandates being an issue as well, or not?
It's a very good question. And one of the things that I have said is no to mandates from the Republicans and no to mandates from the Democrats. We had a proposal from the Republicans for some personal finance classes that would be mandated on our classrooms, and we had a Democratic proposal for some environmental classes to be taught. So I just kind of said, no, we shouldn't be mandating what our local school districts do. What we should be doing is providing them goals, providing them incentives to do really high quality teaching in our schools and provide them the resources that they need to do it. I'll say it's interesting what Representative Igo is bringing up in terms of providing them historic funding and these mandates. In the Senate, for the Republicans' education bill last session, they provided $30 million. That was their entire education package with the surplus that we had. This year, the DFL is providing over $2 billion in education funding. So I just want to showcase sort of the stark contrast in the prioritization of education between the two parties.
Anything else to say on this topic?
I mean, again, I've been hearing, and I challenge you, if you haven't already, talked to the school districts in your district. All of them are finding out that if they implement everything that's in these DFL bills that you're so proud of, they will be in a deficit. And that I have a problem with, because that's not funding education. That's making education harder, and that's going to hurt all of our greater Minnesota communities, not to mention what it's going to do to metro communities. And every superintendent I've talked to in my district has deep concerns on these bills.
Yeah, and I would just say that if you talk to the teachers, if you talk to the paras, if you talk to the bus drivers, if you talk to the folks on the ground that are providing this high quality education to our students, a lot of these quote unquote mandates are benefits for those employees in order to do the best job that they can do. So I really think we need to think about who we're talking to. Superintendents, critical. School board members, critical. But teachers and the folks on the ground in the classroom with our students, those are just as important, and that's what I'm doing, and that's what the DFL is doing.
Well, I'll just add, the one thing I've been hearing from our teachers is wondering where their pension relief is, which isn't included in any DFL bills.
Nor the Senate bill last session.
Right, but there wasn't the money there or the concern to talk about. It's been totally brushed under the rug. So if we're going to play that game, I'll mention the other side of the ticket too.
It's a good point. Pensions are really, really critical, and we're going to provide some relief to that pension. We're not going to get all the way there. We're not going to get them their dream wish list when it comes to pensions, and that's unfortunate, but we are going to get there, and we're going to provide some critical funding, and I think it's going to go a long way.
Great. A question in here now on property taxes for seniors. This is a viewer who's really feeling the crunch of being a retiree and seeing an increase in property taxes. Now, property taxes are generally levied by cities and counties and school districts, though there is a role that the state plays, especially with local government aid, either for counties or cities, and this education funding that you've all been talking about recently. Is there anything being proposed right now to look at property tax relief and or freezing property taxes from the state level? Representative Weigel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so this is something I started working on actually in last session, trying to get the ball moving. Historically, property tax stuff at the state level isn't usually touched because of what you just said. It's usually handled local level, counties, cities. But we're trying to find a way is how can the state be involved to help people? And something I looked at, we talk about the property valuation increases. That's really what people are so upset about up here. I mean, I think between Itasca, St. Louis County, Aiken County, Crow Wing County, we saw the top 4 highest increases. The average in Itasca County is 29%. And that's directly going down to property taxes. So one of the things that we've been talking about is the homestead tax exclusion, which was initially set in 2009. So, we've got 14 years of inflation and property values increasing where that dollar amount hasn't been moved. There's a little headbutting around it because people look at that and say, oh, well, if that valuation increases, it's just the wealthier people are, not paying their fair share. And well, it's not really the case because we just have from this viewer right here that says, they're retired. They've probably been in that home a very long time. Why is it fair to them to have to keep paying more and more taxes? So I think homestead tax exclusion, as well as looking into the homestead tax refunds that the state does, getting some more funding there. The tax bill last year, that was one of the biggest problems I had with it. There was $76 million in there to help with the homestead tax rebates, but it was $1.2 billion for renter tax credits. So I think we need to flip-flop those things and find ways to do that. You also mentioned a freeze. Believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying this, the state of California does something like that, where if you have like a valuation increase of over 40%, you can only see your property value increase by chunks each year, so your taxes don't jump, $1,000, $1,500 in a year span. I think those are all things we should be looking at, and conversations I've been having for well over a year now already.
Senator Hauschild?
Yeah, this is really an important piece. One of the things that I'm authoring is the local government aid and county program aid bill this session in the tax bill. This would provide somewhere around $100 million for each of those programs to our local governments, and this would help them reduce their property tax burden. For instance, in Hermantown, I know that we're looking at hiring 2 new police officers and professionalizing our fire department. With that local government aid doing the calculation, that appropriation would help them cover those costs rather than increasing their property tax levy. So that's an example of how do we provide core services to our communities, but also give them the state resources they need to do the good work. I'll also add that on the public safety front, we're looking at a bill that would be somewhere between $300 and $500 million in direct appropriations to our public safety departments, and that would, in addition, sort of reduce that burden on the local property tax owner. Lastly, I'll just add sort of a nuanced issue for our region, which is payment in lieu of taxes on public lands. We know that the Northland has a lot of public lands and a lot of lake land and forest land. This bill would provide an increase in the formula to pay our counties in northern Minnesota more money for those public lands and managing those lands. This would be a huge boon for the Iron Range and for the Northland, and I'm the author on that bill as well. I think we'll get it done.
Great. Anything else on this?
Yeah, I'll just add, the PILT thing, that was great to mention because the whole range delegation is on that unitedly together. It'd be about $1 increase on all the lands, which just for those listening at home, it's crazy. We get like $2 an acre up here in St. Louis County, but if you are in Hennepin County, you're getting like $90 an acre. The disparity is just incredible. I think the other thing to mention too is that, if we find these ways to really kind of put more money back in people's pocket, again, at the end of the day, and we can reduce these taxes, it's going to expand growth. And one of the biggest problems we have in greater Minnesota is not being able to have other things to pick up the tax base. So like communities where I'm from, where you have mines and mills and power plants, when we lose those things, that's how counties program and can lower taxes. But when we have a place like Boswell Energy that's on the schedule to be shut down, and we can't get a Huber wood mill in because of state regulations and permitting and tax climate, these are how we can lower taxes for everybody. So I think, the tax conversation also is right there in line with permitting and regulation reform so we can make Minnesota an attractive state to do business, because I'm telling you where it's going all right now, and it's to the southeast coast. All you have to do is drive down the interstate there and you'll see a new manufacturing plant or mill that's bringing taxes down in those communities and returning prosperity to the people that live there.
Senator Hauschild, you spoke a bit about public safety, and we actually have a viewer from Hermantown who is talking about a bill that was passed in the Senate, your public safety budget bill. It was passed early in the morning, Saturday morning.
Yes.
You guys are pulling all-nighters already, like you're back in college. But this viewer says, it seems like a lot of criminals would be eligible for early release, which to this viewer seems like a bad idea. Why was this part of the bill?
Well, so a couple of things. I actually voted for a couple of amendments alongside Republican colleagues to not reduce mandatory minimums, especially for gun crimes. So that was something that I was really proud of. I also sided with the Republicans on not allowing sex offenders to live within a certain area of schools, of daycares, of those types of things upon release. I think those are sort of common sense things that we can do in that public safety bill. When it comes to the issue that this reader is messaging us about, there are programs in that bill to sort of reduce recidivism, to go through counseling, to go through sort of ways that we can get them better ingrained into our communities. We already do some of that, but this program is bolstering that to make sure that we're trying to reduce crime, and I think that's really the purpose.
Great. Thoughts on public safety, budget, and some
Yeah,
of these ideas around criminal justice reform?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just to what that viewer is saying, talking about reducing those minimums. I mean, I think the biggest problem we're having in public safety in the state of Minnesota is an accountability problem, right? I mean, we have people that, are, again, we've talked about before. 4 years ago is that I can't believe that we're making, supporting law enforcement is a political issue all of a sudden. And it is. That's unfortunately the world we're in. We need to fix that. But at the same time, we're having communities where there's no accountability of law. And we're seeing that especially in our metropolitan areas. So I think at a time, for what that viewer is saying, reducing those minimums is a really bad idea because people need to know that if you commit a crime, you're going to do the time. And when it comes to public safety, we need to be taking more of a bigger pronged approach and look at it. It's really easy to talk about solutions with funding and all this, but let's really dive into the issues. I'm carrying a few bills I think that I want to help with that. One of them is mental health. And I think that's something on both sides of the aisle we're working on. Behavioral mental health crisis facilities across greater Minnesota and metro Minnesota would be critically important to helping with this. I've been on ride-alongs up here in northern Minnesota where someone's having a mental health crisis and I was a part of that situation. Where do we take them? The local ER for a 72-hour hold. And when we walked in, they knew her name because she's in and out of there every 2 weeks. We have to do something to fix that. It's also making sure our county attorneys have the money available to hire the staff and get the backlog done. Our county attorneys are really struggling to keep up with the caseloads. So I think you kind of couple all these things together as well as giving mental health grants to our local law enforcement departments. So not only those officers who are experiencing traumatic events can get help, but so they can get more training so they can be better advocates when they arrive at those situations. And you combine all that together and create more accountability in our public safety, you're going to take care of our communities. And it all goes back to one of the key tenets of public safety, which is community policing.
Yeah. I think this public safety bill makes a lot of historic investments in a lot of the things that Representative Igo is talking about. That backlog, supporting our courts, making sure that our police have what they need, the resources that they need, the equipment that they need. All of that is really, really critical. I had a bill in the legislature this year, Pathways to Policing, which would help with recruitment and retention of police. We know that that is a big concern nowadays. And so that actually, not my bill specifically, but another Pathways bill from a Republican, Senator Limmer, was included in the public safety bill, which I was really proud to support as well.
Great.
But again, I'll just say too, it's statutory minimums. We shouldn't be lowering those. And they did pass out of the Senate bill, it sounds like, on Friday night.
The mandatory minimums, I voted with Republicans, so it got included in the bill.
Okay, so we still got to make sure that stuff doesn't move forward. I think on the other part of public safety too, we need to support the actual departments and the people themselves and not get lost in all of maybe the other things that are shiny. And unfortunately, that's it. Because also, I believe in that bill, the anti-gun legislation didn't pass, but the funding is included in the Senate bill, correct? And I think that's really concerning as we move forward because I know a lot of viewers back home were very pro-Second Amendment people, and we need to make sure that that funding just goes back to the general fund and doesn't actually fund these red flag laws that people are very concerned about.
We're going to jump back to taxes again because a viewer was following our conversation around property taxes and said, I thought there was a law that property taxes could only go up by a limited amount a year, and that their property taxes went up beyond what he feels they should have. So they acknowledge that it's a local decision, but does the state have some sort of law in the books right now that limits local communities' ability to increase levies?
I am not aware of one.
Okay.
So the way I understand it, yes, there's a limit to how much they can increase it, but a county's got a tax at 95 to 100% of what all their land value is appraised at. So once everything's appraised and in, they can't lower past that statutory minimum. That's the problem. So that's kind of the situation, which is really unique because, again, Itasca County had that 29% increase. So when Itasca County came together and got all their stuff and got their valuations, they had to be within 95 to 100%. And that law was done a long time ago because there was too many people that knew their county auditor who would go in there and say, and all of a sudden they're valued at $20,000 when they got a $200,000 house. So that's kind of why that legislation came about. That's kind of the problem, is that our counties and local governments don't have that ability to kind of tax under that 95%. So there's not a cap on increasing it, they just have to be within those guidelines, as it was explained to me.
Great, Thank you, and thanks to the viewers for keeping those questions coming in. Here's another one on education. The viewer says, new teacher licenses have so many stipulations. Why doesn't the public know about these? And this caller thinks rules are detrimental and these stipulations for having quality educators. We're going to start with Representative Igo on this one. Thoughts on licensures for teachers?
It's definitely a problem I've been hearing about. Now, I don't serve on any education committee. I'm trying to do the best I can to learn from the people around me. I've got a little brother who's a junior on his way to become a social studies teacher. So I'm kind of learning through him because he's getting ready for all that licensure stuff. But there is a lot of hoops to jump through. And that's why I think one of the issues we're having is people go to school here in the state of Minnesota to become teachers, and then we'll jump ship and go to a state like North Dakota or Wisconsin because it's a lot easier to get licensed and actually get in a classroom. And I don't know the nitty gritty, I guess you could say, on what we need to do to fix that. But I agree, we need to find a way to make sure we can attract and retain teachers here and get them into our schools.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, right? I mean, we want to make sure that our educators in the classroom are the best educated, the best, qualified and best prepared to teach our students. But we also don't want to put up extra barriers that are going to stop folks from going into the teacher profession. Minnesota is a state that's known for education. We have some of the highest, if not the highest, ACT scores of all the states that record those types of things. So we're doing a great job on education. But that said, we can always do better. So I'm serving on the Education Policy Committee. I'm happy to continue those conversations around how we make sure we have the right method for getting folks in the classroom.
Great. We're going to change gears here. Another issue that came up this week was the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. And Senator Hauschild, you've been targeted by some groups on your support for that board, and you've had some thoughts in it. And I'm sure, Representative Igo, you may know about this board as well. And Representative Hauschild, or Senator Hauschild, sorry for that. Why do you support the Prescription Drug Affordability Board?
Well, if there's one thing that seniors and folks that are trying to afford their prescription drugs know, it's that it's out of control. And so what this board would do is have a trigger so that if a drug is skyrocketing in price, for instance, insulin, we've seen that in the recent past, this would trigger this board to get involved and evaluate what it is that's causing that increase and look at ways that we can reduce those drug prices. So it's just a check, just like the PUC in the utility sphere, to make sure that we're not finding people price gouging on drug prices. You're right, I've been targeted on this. There's a billboard in the Twin Cities targeting me on this issue, and they're saying that I'm standing with the big pharma groups, when in fact it's big pharma that is using these targeted ads against me. So I'm proud to stand against this. In my day job, I raise money for patients and families that can't afford the care or prescription drugs they need, and we've got to find ways so that folks don't have to rely on GoFundMe pages to afford their prescription drugs.
And I don't know if this proposal has made it to the House floor yet or not, so I don't know if you've got thoughts or feelings on this yet.
Yeah, I'll be honest, we haven't. There's been very minimal conversation in the House. It's not scheduled or anything, so I'm not completely up to speed on it. But after this, I will be looking into it.
Sounds good. Great. Another viewer has a question. Why are they spending money on a railroad line from Duluth to the Twin Cities? And so we'll start with Representative Igo. This is the Northern Lights Expressway, which would be a train from Duluth to the Twin Cities with stops along the way. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm very surprised too. I don't know why we're talking about it. We don't have a good history here in Minnesota of light rail projects. Obviously, we have the Southwest Light Rail and the Twin Cities. That is what now, almost $2 billion over budget and still not completed. Again, we should be prioritizing, if we're going to do transportation funding, let's focus on roads and bridges, which we have plenty of in the state that need to get caught up on. And talk to anyone, you can hear that. So I don't know why this is happening. We have a great interstate that runs from Duluth to the Twin Cities already. There's shuttles, there's Greyhounds, everything under the sun. I don't support building a railroad that way right now when there's plenty of other issues to address.
Thoughts on this project?
Yeah, I think this is a great project. First and foremost, it gets federal infrastructure dollars 4-to-1 to the state of Minnesota to construct and provide for this service. We also know that there are veterans and those with disabilities that have medical care needs in the Twin Cities, that this would provide a great service for them. And then lastly, providing connections between the Twin Cities and the Northland is critical for our tourism economy, for those that are trying to grow businesses in our region. We know that folks from the Twin Cities may be more apt to take a train right up to the Duluth region for a vacation or come up to the Northland and the Boundary Waters. And then we know vice versa, that there are a lot of folks up here that may want to take a trip down to the Twin Cities, don't have to drive, don't have to deal with the traffic in the inner city metro, but go to a Vikings game or go to a Twins game and then shoot back home. So it's a really convenient way to bring kids down and enjoy the different parts of our state. And I think it'll just create better connections and more economic growth.
Great. Anything else on this?
No, I think I kind of said it again. There's plenty of other issues right now than to build a train to Duluth to, the Twin Cities.
All right. Another caller wants to know your opinions if you're in favor of banning future game farms to eliminate chronic wasting disease in our deer. A very important issue in northeastern Minnesota. Let's start with Senator Hauschild on this.
Yeah, this is something that's been, in the news a lot lately, and we've seen other states dealing with this issue much more than Minnesota. So we're sort of on this precipice where this could really grow in Minnesota. We know that St. Louis County has already banned these types of farms. And so I think we've taken an important step to look at making sure we're regulating this correctly so that our farms don't exacerbate this issue. We're not outlawing them, we're not banning them, but we are looking at ways that we can work with the DNR and animal control to really limit the expansion of CWD.
Great.
Yeah, I think I'll lead right off that. Between the Board of Animal Health and the DNR, we need to find out and get the science on this because we're really just trying to understand what it really is here in Minnesota, right? The community of Grand Rapids had a CWD positive deer here last year. They did 2 deer killings in the city limits because usually that means that there's going to be more infected deer. They've killed over 100 deer now and not found another positive deer. So that's going to raise a question to, okay, what really is the science and the health behind all of this? And that's what the DNR and Board of Animal Health are working on doing. When it comes to the government stepping in to ban deer farms, I'm going to have an issue with that right away because I don't think that's government's job. If they are going to do something like that, there better be a buyout in there to take care of all those different families. I believe there's over 100 different deer farms in the state. Not to mention that it's more than just venison they provide. It's all the different things for our deer hunters across the Midwest. So there's a lot more at stake here, but we definitely need to understand the problem and take care of it because it is a huge part of Minnesota's culture. I just believe we got to think twice and act once on this.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not banning them. We're just looking at ways to reduce the expansion of CWD. So I think it's an appropriate response. I think the DNR and animal control are involved and will hopefully restrict this from happening in the future.
Great. Right. Next caller wants to know about state funding for nursing homes on the Iron Range. Both of you represent all or parts of the Iron Range. As you see the budget bills come through, Representative Igo, do you feel confident in the spending levels for nursing homes that are being discussed right now?
Nursing homes are almost completely forgotten in the House bills. Very little funding. In fact, most of the nursing home administrators in my district have called me wondering, were we not heard over the last 2 years with the issues we're having? There's nursing homes in my district that are at 60-70% capacity, not because there's not the need. They can't get the staff and they can barely pay the staff they have. And they're having to send people out onto the street or back to families because they have nowhere to go. This is a colossal issue we're having, and what's eventually going to happen if we don't fix it right now, and this is what I'm hearing from those administrators, is these people are going to end up in hospital beds that we need open for people that actually are having medical emergencies. And this issue could compound on itself and turn really bad. So we need to come together, Republicans and Democrats, and write a bill that funds our nursing homes and gets the support in there that they need, whether that be helping hire staff, workforce development. It's a plethora of issues, but it needs more, and it needs more now.
Yeah, the Senate bill has funding in there for critical access nursing homes, and I'm really excited about that funding. A lot of the nursing homes that would qualify would be in our region because of their rural nature and critical access nature. I also know in Ely, the Boundary Waters Care Center is facing financial hardship, and they're actually doing private fundraising in the community to try to keep that facility alive. That's why in the Human Services bill in the Senate, I have a direct appropriations to help save that facility. In addition to that, I'm working on some tax bill funding that could go directly to that nursing home as well. I've talked to the director there several times. I've also connected him with the Department of Health to make sure that he has the resources he needs on his reimbursements. So I think we're going to make sure that that center is cared for, and we're going to get that critical access funding for our nursing homes.
So it's sounding like, even though Democrats are in charge of both governor, House, and Senate, there are some differences among some of these issues within the budget bills. How do you foresee these issues with folks on the same team in charge finding compromise amongst themselves when it's not necessarily a partisan disagreement, but a disagreement within majority party? Senator Hauschild, how do you think that's going to get reconciled?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. You know, budgeting is all about priorities. It's all about coming together and sort of compromising. And I think this is what's really critical. I do think it's really important that we have Representative Listlegard and myself in the majority right now, because as these bills are coming together, we can find ways to appropriate those dollars to a facility like the Boundary Waters Care Center. If our region were all in the minority, we would be facing a really, really difficult circumstance where we may not be able to get the funding that we need for some of these places. And so I'm proud that we're fighting for the care centers that need it in our region. And I think we'll see that come together once we go through the conference committees.
How's it looking from your vantage point?
So, you know, we're seeing in all the different committees, there's just different appeals. And some of that is, you know, Senate, we have senators who've been around a long time. We have newer House chairs. There's just a little bit of clash there. We're for sure going to conference committee in a lot of these bills, right? And those that get put on that conference committee, I think, are going to be very helpful. But I think those on the outside, too, could be offering ideas to kind of get a way in there. And again, you know, you mentioned, I think the range delegation has a very important role here to play, especially with you being seat 34, right? I mean, I'm hoping on some of these bills, like the environment bill, I know you and I share some deep concerns about that. You know, hopefully that's a bill where you can put the laundry list into the chair and say, doesn't pass without these. And those are things that we can do to try and mediate these bills, and that's the point of conference, really. So I think there's some good opportunities to be had in the month ahead.
Great. Speaking of one of those other issues, and this comes from a caller here, Governor Walz has proposed some stimulus checks, one-time rebate checks that really hasn't received much traction from either the House or the Senate here. What is the likelihood of that proposal being included in some sort of end deal here? So stimulus checks or one-time spending or checks back to taxpayers. Representative Weigel, we'll start with you.
I don't even know if there's a bill introduced. Do you know? I mean, that's what it's all going to come down to. I mean, obviously things can happen without that. The appetite in the Minnesota House has been next to none for something like that.
In a bipartisan way? Or?
From what I'm understanding, yeah. Okay. The Democrats I talked to, Republicans I talked to, I have not heard the support for that.
And where's your opposition then to using particularly the one-time surplus, so not the ongoing surplus, for this one-time stimulus?
Well, and again, if we were going to do a one-time stimulus, I think the proposal being talked about is just so minimal, and it was going to be taxed again anyways from what the governor's office was saying. We need to find ways to create generational impacts. Again, we could lower taxes, bring those brackets down. That's putting more money in people's pocket quicker than it is going to be to a $600 check that you're going to be taxed 21% on, right? I mean, the last time we did anything like this would have been the Jesse checks, and what did they end up being after taxes a little over $300? I mean, that's not actually giving money back to anybody. That's not a good proposal in doing it. I think that's why you see Republicans and Democrats kind of standoffish on it. And again, I'll just remember, the governor is in a different branch of government. So he's in the executive branch, he can talk about whatever he wants, but he cannot write a bill and introduce it. He needs someone from either party to introduce that in the House or the Senate.
But we need a signature to pass a bill, and he's obviously very influential. And so, you know, I'm in favor of these rebates. I think regardless of whether or not they're ultimately in the final bill, we're going to have the most historic tax relief we've ever seen in the state of Minnesota. So whether it includes rebates or not, we're going to get folks the relief they need. But I am supportive of these rebates. It's funny, we're kind of in a counter situation here where the Democrats saying we need more tax relief and the Republicans saying maybe not in this particular case. But I think we'll find some really good relief in this bill.
Okay.
Well, I wasn't saying no to tax relief, and I'm not saying no to returning money, but giving someone a $400 check that's taxed at 21% is not relief, and it's their money to begin with. So I think we be careful when we're making that distinction. If we were going to give the whole $20 billion surplus back, that's one thing, but that is not the proposal at hand, and that is not what's being talked about by the governor. So we have to remember that when we're moving forward with having these discussions, and in the same tax relief that you're talking about, we're also talking about adding a new tier to the tax and increasing tiers. It's not tax relief, that's increasing taxes. Those are revenue raisers to help take care of increased spending. This is a larger conversation. We need to make sure that we're not, mixing these two things when we're talking about this subject.
Anything else on this?
Well, I think again, you're going to see historic tax relief in this bill, and it's going to go to the people that need it most through that child care tax relief, through the possibly rebate checks, through Social Security tax relief. We're going to target it in a way that gets to the people that really need it, and that's maybe the difference.
Okay. We're going to take a caller question right now on a different topic. Do you support Narcan in our public schools? And I believe Narcan is the relief or the antidote to some fentanyl overdoses that different folks can have here. So, Senator Hauschild, do you support Narcan's being available in our public schools?
Yeah, and I sadly had a cousin who passed away from a fentanyl overdose. I unequivocally support having Narcan available in our schools. Sadly, this is the state of affairs that we're in. Our young people are addicted to these drugs at the highest levels that we've seen in decades, and we need to have immediate ways to address this issue if it comes about. Now, we also need to find ways to reduce the use in the first place and have the resources we need for our young people, but absolutely, if it saves a life, then that's more than worth it.
And I've read where there are proposals to expand the people who have access to Narcan. Before, I think it was just some emergency folks and maybe police, but there are proposals out there to expand it to other entities.
Yeah, I'll just add it. I think that's the importance of having school resource officers too. Not only does that teach that community policing, that our police force is there to work with our community, make it safer, but then they're going to be able to have the Narcan on them in case that situation happens. I think you also need to tie the whole fentanyl crisis to, again, we need to make sure we're prosecuting criminals. Someone that's going to be trafficking fentanyl, and we've had plenty of busts up here in northern Minnesota over the last year. Those people need to be have the whole book thrown at them because they're killing Minnesotans, they're killing children. There's no lighter way to put it. So it's a joint operation, but yeah, in the meantime, let's support those school resource officers that can carry that Narcan and save a life if they have to.
And in the public safety bill that we just passed on the Senate floor on Friday or Saturday morning, we did increase the penalties for fentanyl drug distribution. So we are addressing it from that side of things as well. This is an important issue. We have to figure it out.
Great. Another caller, we're going to talk about transportation, which we haven't touched on yet here. They have a very specific question that I'll ask, but then more broadly, do you know when they are going to fix Highway 73 and Highway 169 in Virginia and north of Chisholm? So that's a specific question, and I know there are formulas and priority lists, but let's just talk more broadly about transportation funding. What are your thoughts on what's going to happen there? We'll start with Representative Vigo.
Yeah, roads and bridges. That's where the dollars need to go. Not only funding for long-term projects, those state highways and such, but also make sure we have the programming dollars to go back to our counties for those smaller projects that were kind of talked about by that caller. I also think it's important too, there's a lot of stuff in transportation that I've learned a lot over the last couple of years. For instance, like the Wetland Mitigation Fund, which is huge when we're talking about greater Minnesota roads and bridges, because if we have to expand and move into wetlands a little bit, we need to actually by law make sure and mediate that in another place in the state. So having funds there available doesn't make these projects cost prohibitive. So those are a lot of good ways. Also important to mention in transportation that we need to get the dollars to our townships too. They actually take care of the most roads in the state of Minnesota is all of our townships. And usually our townships are operating on hairline budgets. So getting money and operating dollars to those townships so they can get more gravel down and have plows running so that we can have access there is vitally important.
Any funding for our roads and bridges is beneficial to our region. My district's the size of Massachusetts. Yours is probably the size of Vermont. This is a lot of roads, and so any funding we can get is really critical. Another example of a road project that's really important is Highway 61 up the North Shore, really a central artery to all of those tourism opportunities from all across our state and all across our country. And there's a construction project there that's short on budget, and so I'm looking for ways. How do we include in the transportation bill funding for Highway 61? So that it's only one summer impacting those businesses and that thoroughfare up the North Shore. But we need to make sure all of our transportation projects are funded up in the Northland.
And for transportation projects, correct me if I'm wrong, but normally there's a priority list that is made by each Department of Transportation, sub-center, regional center, and very rarely do you guys identify, or the legislature identify specific projects, but really rely on those priority lists that are put together by the engineers from the different regions. Is that still how it works? I've been gone for a while.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Obviously we all have great relationships with the people that oversee the districts. Sometimes we have some conversations about some bigger projects. I'll mention the 169 from Pengilly to Taconite.
Still not done yet.
It's still not done. We got 9 miles left. But that's a huge project that we're talking about. This is a time, again, we have a surplus. Here's a way for us to make a one-time investment that'll have generational impacts, to help that thoroughfare. And I've been working with communities from Cohasset to Hibbing about who want to come together and get that thing done, because it's going to mean, corridors of commerce for all of them, and all the small communities in between are going to prosper. So we're having those conversations in the House, definitely with the Chair of Transportation, about understanding it's not only a safety concern, but it's all about driving our economy with these kind of projects. So conversations are still happening around that.
Great. I want to talk about workforce challenges right now. We're hearing from large employers and small employers. We talked about it on the nursing home front. It just seems to be a challenge. We're seeing the baby boom generation retire, not as many people coming up. Sometimes there's a skills mismatch between jobs that are available and the skills that people have. And it seems like we need everybody to be participating in our economy to make it successful. With a low unemployment rate, that's not the issue either. So what can be done, and what are the steps that are being done across the entire state budget to really incentivize making sure we're taking down barriers to make sure that businesses have the workers they need for today and tomorrow? Senator Hauschild, we'll start with you.
No, thank you. There's an entrepreneur fund in the jobs bill that I think could go a long way in helping grow small businesses and some of that recruitment and retention of employees. But I think, back to what I said at the beginning, housing and childcare is really, really the critical piece to workforce, especially for my generation. When people are thinking about employing or moving up here into the Northland, they got to know that there's housing, and they got to know that folks who have kids have a place for their child to go to daycare. So looking at the childcare tax credit bill that I'm carrying, the $1 billion that we're looking to invest in housing in the Senate, I think that will go a long way in making historical investments in those areas to help grow our workforce.
Tackling our workforce challenge.
Huge question, obviously. I think there's a couple things. You mentioned two of them. I'll talk about, I think it also starts in our high schools and partnering with our tech schools and our community colleges. A little story I've been telling is, if you went to a classroom full of 18-year-olds who are getting ready to graduate high school and you said, I could give you a job that's $65,000 a year, you get every holiday off, and I'll give you 20 days off a year, and all you need is a CDL. And then you tell them that it's a garbage man, every single hand would go down and they wouldn't want that job. We need to talk about ways to tell people that no matter what job you have in this world, you're important and you matter to keep our society rolling and moving and functioning. So whether you go off to Yale and you have a 8-year program and you become a doctor, or you go to Hibbing North College and you become a welder and you help keep our mines going and our mills going. Everyone's here for a purpose, and it's diversifying that portfolio and realizing that there's good paying jobs everywhere. I think that's the other huge part of this that we need to talk about, and that's sometimes not just money. That's actually having conversations about how can we tie people together, how can we create partnerships, and the rest will follow.
One of the things I had in the education sphere was a CTE funding expansion, really doubling the funding for CTE in our local schools.
Can you explain what CTE
Yes,
is?
Career and technical education, much of what Representative Igo was just referring to. And I think that's really critical. We have schools that do it really, really well. Rock Ridge and Proctor, for example, have really good programs. But I want to make sure that all of our schools have that funding opportunity to provide those programs, because I think you're absolutely right that if we get those kids exposed to those opportunities, they're that much more likely to go into those careers. I also think there's an opportunity to partner with the trades and labor. We have a rich history of that in the Northland, and doing that could go a long way in getting folks into those careers.
Great.
Absolutely, and that could even solve our home crisis, right? We need more homes. We have students that partner with the trades and start building the homes not only in our Northland but across our state.
Right.
It's a win-win situation.
Great. Well, we're going to keep it hyper-local. Both of you serve on the advisory board of the IRRB. Representative Igo, you're chairing that now. What do we see, and this probably goes beyond the legislative session, as some of the priorities for the IRRB as in the year ahead? We'll start with Chair Igo.
I'm really excited to work with Commissioner Rukavina and kind of talk about, the agency's done a lot of great things in the past, but I think also there's an opportunity to kind of delve into new things. And she's kind of shared some of those ideas with me, and I think it's all about partnering again with our communities. The couple projects we did when we met a few weeks ago, every single project was a partnership between a local bank, a local community, and a local business. We need to keep building on that, because that's how we create more jobs and more viability in our communities, whether it be childcare, whether it be working on housing initiatives, whether it be working on bringing more businesses to our range. There's fantastic opportunities ahead, and I'm really excited to work on them with not only the commissioner, but all the board members.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Housing, childcare, that's what we really need to be investing in, and education. We've seen the IRRB starting to get involved in some of our schools, our K-12 schools, and potentially even higher ed. I think those are good investments. They go a long way in growing our communities. The other thing I would say is we've had a history with the IRRB of looking at the big shiny object, and that's really important to find those big industries that could come to our region and provide hundreds of jobs. I also think we need to find opportunities to invest in our entrepreneurs and our local young people to start jobs and start employers here in our region. So let's look small, middle, and big on our investments.
Great. Another viewer question here, and Representative Igo, you may know about this one. What is the status of funding for the Canisteo Pit dewatering project?
Yeah. So where the Canisteo bill lies right now, it is in the bonding bill that is in the Senate. We got it in there, the full funding. I believe the environment bill, we're working on some OEM, But it is in there ready to go right now. I've been trying to move it as a quicker project, if you will, a standalone bill, so we could get the money there. Obviously, anyone that lives in the Itasca County community knows how important that project is and getting done. In fact, if we probably didn't get the pumping done this year with partnership with the IRRR, this spring could have been really bad for the communities at Taconite, Bovey, Coleraine, and R-Wabana Township.
And this is a former mine pit that is
Yes.
potentially could flood.
Could
the
flood
community.
over, yes. So, but right now the funding is there in the bonding bill. I'm watching it very closely as we approach the end of session that it stays there and gets done.
Let's get the yes votes in the Senate, provide these critical needs in our communities.
Great. I think we only have about a minute left. And so I want to just briefly, we've talked about what is going to happen, but historically there's been a lot of bills that have already passed. And I'm not talking good, bad, or indifferent, but if each of you could just quickly talk about what you feel that has already passed is going to have the most substantial impact on Minnesotans' lives that's already passed into law thus far. And we've got about a minute, so take 30 seconds apiece. Senator Hauschild.
Yeah, well, I have to say the second bill that we passed this session was the unemployment extension for North Shore miners. The North Shore mine in Babbitt and the processing plant in Silver Bay were shut down for almost a year, and those workers were without unemployment. So we got that done. We had bipartisan support, and that went a long way to ensuring that those workers stayed in their communities, didn't leave for new opportunities, and now the mine is opening back up. So this is really great news, and I was really proud to get that done as quickly as humanly possible.
Okay. Legislation that's passed is going to have a substantial impact on Minnesotans' lives.
So Senator Hauschild made a great, that was a great bill we got done early, but House File 7, I think, is the biggest one. That was the 2040 renewable energy mandate. We're going to see that affecting us for the next, almost 20 years here as we see how our power companies are going to be able to adapt to that. I have a lot of concerns. I think it's going to lead to higher prices in electricity. That's going to directly go back to Minnesotans. So we're going to be working on that for years to come. I know I will be, to try and mediate that and use all the toolboxes, because right now it's a solar and wind bill. Doesn't include nuclear or biomass. So that's probably the number one bill I see.
Great. Well, I appreciate it, and we are out of time, and I'd like to thank Senator Grant Hauschild and Representative Spencer Igo for being with us today. Join us again next week on Minnesota Legislative Report, when we will welcome even more legislators from northern Minnesota on the program. For the team at PBS North, I'm Tony Sertich. Have a great evening.